So who thinks that it has been interesting 2 days? Most of guys. Excellent. So this is the final session. I hope that it's going to be the most interesting one. But there is one kind of condition for that. It's going to be the most interesting one if you come right over here and ask a really good question. I mean, if there are no good questions, it's going to be really boring, and we can go home. So while you think your questions, let's get started with some easy question meanwhile. And the question I have heard asked quite a bit and quite often during the conference have been, when GWT will be released? Actually, how?
I guess I'm on the hook for that.
Yeah.
So if you remember my original slide deck, it basically had in parentheses tentative ideas. Yeah, so it basically means we don't know. What it means is basically we have an idea of the list of features that we think should be in GWT 3.0, and we've kind of discussed many of them at the show. Some of them surround a better interop with JavaScript and with the browser. Some of them revolve around making the development model easier. Some of them, Vaadin just kind of showed you in the previous session about integrating with web components. And so we know the things that we need to add or potentially are required to add, but we're not just sure which of the features on that list must be in GWT 3.0 or whether there would be a GWT 2.9. And so we really can't say. All I can say is that you should just watch the blogs and watch our mailing list and watch the commits, and you'll basically get an idea of what's coming down the pipeline. But for right now, those are just kind of tentative ideas. I don't want to be on the hook for saying this, but it's probably going to be a couple of quarters from now.
So, I can take that from yeah, Daniel always keeps monologuing in these panels, so we should have 2 mics and one with the kind of mute.
Or electric shock.
Yeah. So, no question at all. Come over here. And please, anyone else, if you have a question, quite from right up as well. So.
Hello, I have a question about SuperDev mode. Can I ask it?
Yes.
Is it?
Or be closer.
You need to be relatively close to the mic.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about SuperDev mode. When we have used plugin for browser and we had ability to debug our application on the real services with no server option. But with SuperDev mode, we have not this ability. How should we do? What should we do?
So the question is basically, back with the classic dev mode, you could pass the -no server option to it, and you could just debug the app without having any kind of server. That was.
He's talking about seeing the objects.
Huh?
I think it's breakpoint seeing objects.
Oh, seeing objects? You mean like stepping through and actually seeing the
No, the problem is when I use SuperDev mode, I able to use mock services. But if I want to see real data from real services, I don't have no ability to use it.
So you want to use SuperDev mode with a real backend that includes real data. I think you can do that today. Maybe Colin.
Yeah, we just discussed. You can do that today. There's actually no difference in there. So SuperDev mode has 2 modes. You can either start it through dev mode, and with GWT 2.7, the default is actually to not start dev mode anymore. It actually brings up SuperDev mode, and you're in this mode. You hit reload, and it recompiles. So it starts Jetty. Yes. So you practically probably want to, and maybe Brian will correct me, you probably want to be in the mode where you're actually using the bookmarklets. And what you would be doing, you would actually be doing a production compile on your normal server. Just as normal, you would probably have your WAR file on there, and you would load the app from there, the production compiled app, and then you would click the bookmarklet with super dev mode running in the background, and it would actually compile the application and restart your application now with actually the JavaScript coming from super dev mode. Does that sound correct?
But is this mainly about the fact that we don't have the dash war? Like the super dev mode does not. Okay, so I'm trying to intuit maybe what he's talking about is that in the old dev mode, you could literally point it at a war directory, exploded war directory, and it would just work. Oh, you don't want to have a war directory.
You want to have your production server running your services.
Okay. Well, I defer to Brian on this. He probably knows one.
So then the bookmarklet answer is exactly for you.
Could you show me after the session?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm using it, it works.
Okay, just, sorry, one more note on that. The changes that should be landing soon in Google plugin for Eclipse, the integration with WTP, I believe will make it possible to start any server, including your real production server, and launch super dev mode there. Yeah, Brandon's work, Brandon Donaldson.
It kind of also sort of works on IntelliJ, right?
Yeah. Let's take the next question.
Okay, so my question is, well, more general maybe, but there's a kind of a challenge that we have as a community to advocate GWT, because currently what we are, you know, the GWT, we are obviously believers here, but a lot of people, you know, when you talk and you try to convince them the GWT is really the good way to do web applications, they obviously need kind of a convenience that this is something that's gonna work and not gonna die. That's obviously now the recent thing with Google Inbox, it's boosting again a bit of the community that, you know, Google is still supporting it and so on. Though, you know, when someone tries to see what's behind Google, everything is pretty old. The last Google I/O was, the conference was saying just how to migrate to Dart, your GWT projects. It's not a very good message. And you know, you go to see what the projects are. They are all old. The showcase widgets are like decade old. You know, it's still like, you know, it's fading out. And I really think, and I think that everyone here believes that GWT has the potential to be now like a star in this, you know, in the web development, right? We have huge number of Java developers, you know, who could contribute to these rich applications, but they don't. You know, we all know what it means. But on the other hand, when you advocate and they go then and see that you advocate something that is potentially dying, you can lose your credibility. So you don't also want to push it too much, right? So
let me rephrase this. So could we do it in a such way that we'll pass around the panel and we'll give 10 sec for each member of the panel to pitch GWT for guys who are really skeptic about it. So what's your top argument for being able to sell GWT to use to those projects? And all of you, you have to use different arguments than the previous ones. So which end should we start?
So
no.
You're last.
Yeah. Thank you.
And may I maybe extend it, because pitching is, I think this is something that, you know, most people know how to pitch when we know what are the advantages of it.
No,
but the thing is, what can we do to make GWT more attractive to new developers, basically?
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to give the other people a little bit time to think. So I'm not going to give an answer in the pitch right now. That's what we're going to do in a minute. But one of the reasons we actually moved out all of the resources from developers.google.com to gwtproject.org was actually to open them up for contributions. And we do know there's a whole bunch on the web page that actually needs updating. But frankly, we as the GWT team, we're more focused on working on the compiler, and we don't have tech writers anymore that actually update that stuff. And Julian did an excellent job of actually making all these resources easily editable with one click. So we're kind of relying on you guys to actually update parts of the documentation, especially to delete really old things. So we're really good if you are sending us pull requests and saying, well, this application, this sample, that looks really outdated. It's better not to have that anymore. So this is kind of like a plea. Sometimes contributing is just a small thing. You just showed me a really cool GWT application, and we used to do these things even on developers.google.com, where we were just saying, hey, I've built this using GWT for these kinds of reasons, and this is a cool application. And I'm very happy to actually have these kinds of things on gwtproject.org. So then I'm going to, who's going to start with my GWT idea?
I can commit that I will contribute this.
Thank you.
So, Kristen, you might start. So 10 seconds, why everybody should be using GWT, even though they are skeptics?
Well, if I were to sell that to someone that is really into JavaScript, one of the main reasons I think that...
and time's up.
Right. Well,
let's try again.
efficiency when it comes to runtime once it's compiled.
Google's built some of the most sophisticated multi-platform web applications in the world, including the new Google Inbox and Google Spreads using this technology. So if we're doing it, you should too.
It's the only reasonable way to maintain a large application with a large team.
I think people should make an educated choice, and they should start measuring. And I think if they start measuring in terms of performance and stuff, maintainability, GWT is always going to stack up as a really good framework.
Okay, my number one reason, type safety, being able to refactor using professional software engineering tools.
It's tough if you're in the back.
Yeah. No, this is an easy one.
It's a fast, efficient. Wait, is that it? Nope. No, it's not efficient. You want it not to be efficient? Okay. It's the fastest, most efficient way to build web applications that still isn't dead.
And as a benefit, you can use all your existing Java libraries on the client side, and you get to use Java as well. Nobody mentioned that, I think, not directly.
So. So you know that GWT is pretty hard to use, so it means that you have to be pretty smart to be able to use that. But if you are really smart to use it, you can get the most performance out of your applications. So you should start using GWT so that all the other guys in the room know that you are the smartest one. Next one.
I'm just wondering if there's plans to have support for Gradle without via Ant.
Everything I say is about to be nullified and canceled by him. But yes, there was some. Originally, we planned to actually break the GWT build up and make it and Mavenize it, so I wasn't using Ant anymore, because I'm not really a big fan of Ant. And that turned out to be kind of hard to do, as well as we didn't get the benefits that we thought we would. So next step is basically it was to Gradleize it. And I actually added some early scripts to Gradleize it for my own benefit, because I like to be able to just open up the GWT source code base in my IDE, and IntelliJ just automatically configures the project for me, and I don't have to spend like a half hour setting it up. But what he's going to tell you, and once I somewhat agree with him, is that Gradle performance is pretty bad, so is Maven. We want builds that are uber quick, and none of the current Java build systems really stack up. But I tend to like Gradle because the IDEs understand it, and that's like one of the benefits that I think any successor build system would have to handle. But anyway,
you can import your Maven artifacts into Gradle as well, so you can use it in Gradle, just not build it with Gradle.
Yeah.
So you kind of already said what I was about to say. If you guys have been in the BOF session on Singular yesterday, we got into this discussion about we need fast iteration times to make the model work in Java, and that also means we need a fast build system. If the build system takes 5 seconds, if I make a simple HTML file to actually run that and compile that into the browser, the whole development model falls apart. So what I did is I actually looked at almost all the Java build systems up to this point, and there's literally none which has a really fast round trip time, except one. And that's frustrating. And you look, I'm not going to pick on one particular one, it's just going to grab a random one, and you brought up Gradle, so I'm going to use that. I've looked at Gradle, and I literally did a hello world build, just printing out hello world. And on my MacBook, this was, even if I used it as a daemon, even if I tried to make it really fast, keep it around, this was at least 1.5 seconds. This is disastrous for doing nothing. I think the state of build systems in the Java world is in a really poor state, and the only people that actually have done something about that is a couple of Google engineers that got to Facebook and were missing our internal build system. And they replicated this as bug. It's not widely adopted. It doesn't even work on Windows. This is why we don't have a good solution I can just pull out of the hat. But it's the only one who can actually do a significant amount of work incrementally and really fast.
Speaking as a former Googler, let me help you understand that 1.5 seconds in Google time is approximately 1.5 months in everybody else's time.
Yeah. I did want to say there is some Gradle integration available, though. There's actually a Gradle plugin for Gwt, I believe. Does Thomas maintain that? Who maintains that? So I talked to someone else at the show yesterday. I forget his name. His nice name was Jin. I think he's somewhere here probably. And he was telling me that in his organization, they tend to package up their application, like each particular activity or each particular component is a separate like Maven subproject. And the transitive build time of that is basically too long. So he was complaining, he was basically saying that even though he runs Maven, it just takes way too long to build his project, even if you change nothing. And so the basic problem with Gradle and Maven is that although if you just have a linear project as a bunch of source files and there's no sub-dependencies, it might actually be be reasonable. But if your project is actually composed of many sub-projects, they're just way too slow at actually doing change detection. They take too long. It just takes seconds. Like Maven in particular takes like 5 seconds. And so I believe the answer is that we're probably personally not going to put any time into Gradle. If someone wants to do it, we would accept it from the community. But the Gwt team is probably going to look for something that's a factor of 10 times faster. That's just like the nature of how we roll inside Google. We will get penalized. Like people will just complain about the Gwt team if we produce something that's going to be really slow.
So let's take the next question.
Hello. I just wanted to know what is the level of quality of what you call the trunk, and should we or can we use it for a production project?
Yes, definitely. So the development model currently is that we do code reviews. We do that very thorough in the open. Most of the time there's at least one Googler on the review. There's a couple of external people that we trust enough that have shown over time that they're worth having a +2 ability. For instance, Julian with his great work on GSS is one of the external people that can actually +2 patches. So, but once these patches are in the open source repository, we Googlers, we pick them up and we commit them into our internal repository. Normally this is like straight away. Sometimes there's patches that take us a little while to actually get in because we need to do a couple of other changes within the repository. So let's say if you were to follow the external repository with a week distance in terms of patches, and you actually follow the contributors list about breakages, which we rolled back, you would be fine, since we're actually running Google's production off of head.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's missing is maybe we should have some indication as to which patches have been gardened into Google and which patches have been left ungardened. Like for the most part, they within a week they get pulled in, but sometimes there's patches that linger for a much longer period of time and they don't get cherry picked in. There are some, but. Yes, right. But one thing he's telling you is that when a patch lands in the trunk, and if it's been in there for a couple of days, chances are several hundred, if not 1,000, internal Google apps have all had their integration tests run on that. So like Inbox and spreadsheets and Google Shopping Express and Google Groups, they're all running off of that latest patch. So it's pretty safe.
So what you are saying is that if Julian +choose for some really, really poor patch, it's going to be stopping Google.
Yeah, that might actually happen. We've had that in the past. It doesn't happen
Think
that often.
about it.
Not particularly Julian, but I committed stuff, other GWT team member committed stuff on open source, which we thought was fine. And then we imported into Google, and then we committed internally, and like 2 hours or an hour later, you suddenly have everything is red. And what you do in that kind of situation, either you understand the situation within 2 minutes, and you can fix it, or you roll back. And then we roll back the external repository as well. And normally you can see these git reverts and you know, oh, something's bad with that patch, and we're going to retry.
Just to comfort the public, when he means something turns red, that means like the developer tests turn red. We don't push things to production right after a GWT patch lands. So there's an additional level of QA and validation that happens. So I don't want people thinking in the external world they can just push a patch and just get it into the Google search or something.
Okay, the next question.
Okay. Hi, there are a lot of new panel depending on the Flexbox model in mGWT, and a lot of really cool panel like the layout panel in GWT. Are there plans to switch over the widgets and the panels to Flexbox model in GWT 3.0, or should we wait for some kind of polymer widgets? What would be a good idea to build new widgets?
So we've discussed what we're going to do with widget already a couple of times. And widget was originally done by Joel and Bruce to fix memory leaks. Because in IE, as it happens, one of the engines was reference counting and the other one wasn't. So if you had a listener in there, it meant that you actually were just leaking and leaking memory. This is why we have this whole mode of we attach something once that thing gets added, and we detach something. For most modern browsers, that's not remotely true anymore. And I'm even having a hard time in that one not-so-modern browsers to replicate the problem. So that means that some of the value that widget provides is just gone. And you're basically having overhead in your applications just because IE6 used to be a very, very bad browser. So going forward, if you think about 2, 3, 4 years from now, you don't want to be using widget no more. So this is just off the top of my head. This is nothing we've decided to do. But probably what we're going to end up doing is something along the lines of we're going to use the old GWT user jar and basically rename it to something called GWT Classic. You know, classic things are good.
Like Volvo Classic.
And then we're going to basically look at what is a common denominator for current browsers, i.e. 11 and going forward, the evergreen browsers. And then you come up with things like JSON-interop to directly access JavaScript objects. You come up with a bare metal DOM API, which is supposed to be Elemental 2.0. And a couple of things need on top of that, like safe HTML, and that's about it. And from there on out, and based on these abstractions, you can build something new. And that something new is actually web components.
So let's do a quick poll.
I think there's a little bit more nuance to it. I think I agree 100% to what he said. I just like to add on top of that, though, that we don't plan to take away anything that would break any of your existing apps. And I tend to think that this could be done in a sort of gradual process in the sense that all of your existing widgets and UI binder stuff would continue to work, but that you would gradually start injecting like Polymer widgets or web components or Vaadin components or some other kind of thing that underneath is basically using the modern browser technology to implement these things. They could be widgets, you know, they could work in a dual mode, like kind of like Vaadin showed, where things could be a widget or they could be a component. But I think in general, though, if you were doing a new app from scratch, you would want to use the modern techniques of doing it, which would be Polymer components or brick components or raw DOM access or using something like Singular. And you would not want to make everything a heavyweight widget.
So let me add on top of that. We as the GWT team discussed this many times, and we try to be, going forward, we don't want to be opinionated on these kinds of things. We want to provide to you the basic tools, a really good compiler, a really good abstraction on top of JavaScript, JSON-interop, and the basic APIs to interact with the DOM. And on top of that, we don't want to promote a certain thing. This is why we're a little bit hesitant because we've put out solutions before, and that kind of hindered you guys to actually come up with better solutions because everybody was like, oh, you know how to do MVP because there's already activities in places in the GWT SDK, and that's the standard way of doing it. And that's not good. We want different solutions to compete on the same basic stack. And if we get that basic stack right, really fast compiles, really good in terms of output size, and so on and so forth, we're going to see many different really good solutions that fit different use cases. And that's a much nicer place to be going forward.
So we didn't, just really quickly, we didn't answer his question. His original question was, are we going to actually go back and refactor the old widgets and support flexible box model? And the answer is that the no one. No, yeah. So no one in Google's going to do that. If someone else made an external contribution that did that, that's fine. Or you just use the mGWT widgets. But we're probably not going to mess with the classic widgets.
Yeah. Yeah. What I was going to say that actually like this Flexbox, it's so easy to use that you wouldn't even need a widget for it. You can basically you can make it even simpler. Like the Polymer project has this like layout, whatever it's called. It's basically you create a div, you add a layout attribute without any value, and then you add either vertical and horizontal, and there you have everything you need. So there's no points of implementing anything in GWT because it's already there in the browser.
The one thing layout panels give you is the ability to tell children they've resized. And if I'm not mistaken, someone can correct me here, the browser doesn't give you ways to say, has that element resized? There's no way to check that without doing things, dirty hacks like what the resize layout panel, for example, is doing.
Yeah, but typically you don't actually want JavaScript to run when someone is like
right. Okay.
So yeah, yes, the GWT panels and the GWT widgets basically you actually get notification as like someone is like, let's say, turning a phone from portrait to layout, or when they're resizing the window. But the problem is that when you're running JavaScript during the browser painting the screen, you're going to lose all kinds of smooth animation and the ability of the GPU to basically redraw the screen without any interruption from the CPU. And so even something as simple as adding a single listener, like a scroll listener, onto the browser will disrupt the scrolling behavior in modern browsers. So modern browsers are multi-process. So typically there's a main CPU process, and then there's a renderer process. So if you ever look in your task manager, you'll see like 20 Chrome processes running. So normally when you're scrolling the scroll bar, the main CPU process doesn't even have to get involved. The rendering process will just notice that it needs to shift the layer that's on the GPU up and down the screen until it needs to repaint, because you've scrolled so much that there's nothing rendered in that spot. But if you put a scroll listener or some other kind of resize listener on the actual window, all of a sudden it has to shift all the stuff back to the main CPU thread, and so you get a slowdown and you get janky behavior and scrolling. So typically you want to take JavaScript out of the execution pathway. And I think Daniel's frequently mentioned this in his presentations. So I'm not attacking you, Colin. I'm just saying that's actually a benefit to actually get out of the business. Okay. Oh, you were, okay, sorry, I misunderstood. So he's a smart guy.
Okay, let's have the next question.
Yeah, so it seems like GWT's priorities are moving more towards running closer to the metal and using facilities that already exist out there through GS interop. Now, is there a time schedule for like when can we see a linker that might be able to link third-party JavaScript libraries and optimize them? Because it would be lovely to use JS interop and just choose whatever is out there and make it run as well as GWT native stuff does.
I can do the basics, because if you so internally we already do this. So if you look at Inbox, it actually uses GWT and the Clojure compiler together. So we already have a code base for this, but Ray hasn't gotten around to actually do it. This is why I wanted to answer that. And there needs to be some amount of work that actually needs to be done in order to be able to open source it. In some ways, it actually relies on proprietary Google technologies, and Ray can tell you how he's going to fix that.
Yeah, so today we actually have a linker internally. It's called Clojure Single Script Linker. How many people are familiar with the Single Script Linker? So there's an old linker called single script linker that allows you to produce a single permutation library that you can kind of use like as if you had written a hand-coded JavaScript library. That linker actually does not use the cross-site iframe linker, so it's incompatible with SuperDev mode. So I have a variation of that re-implemented which is a version of single script linker that uses cross-site iframe linker and therefore works with SuperDev mode. And there's another variation of that that's Clojure single script linker that actually produces output.js that the Clojure compiler can consume. And so the problem right now is that that's actually tied to other internal stuff within Google, so I need to extract that out somehow so that the proprietary bits are not included. But it shouldn't be too hard to do it, and you're about the 4th person that's asked me this, so I will look at doing it very soon. And so I can't give you a timeline on that, but it shouldn't be too hard. So, yes. But I don't promise to actually support this, and so what I'll do is I'll put it on GitHub, and I'll say here's like github.com/cromwellian/Clojure single script linker, and people can start using it. And then if somebody wants to actually then turn it into a patch to the GWT SDK and they clean it up and things like that, then we can maybe integrate it. But we're all kind of busy right now doing a lot of stuff, so I'm kind of just I'll dump it on you guys, and you can take it and run, clean it up, and then make a patch out of it, and then it'll get reviewed, and maybe we can pull it back into the standard distribution if possible.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Thanks.
Okay.
Next one.
Hi. I actually have a couple of questions that relate to previous questions, so I'll just start with the first one. Is there you talk about using more raw DOM elements than widgets, but is there a way to a nice way to add handlers to these kind of elements? Because right now it's like much more boilerplate than add click handler or add the value change handler or add things like that when you get raw DOM elements.
So there's basically 2 things to remove that kind of boilerplate. First of all, today we still have a huge amount of boilerplate just because we don't have Java 8 syntax.
Yep.
And attaching a listener will become much easier using a simple closure. The other bit is what you actually would need is a JS interface where you could just say element add event listener, pass in the string, click, and that callback. And that will probably take care of all the boilerplate.
So 2.8?
So yeah, so the elemental library that I have, that I'm working on right now, LML 2.0, already kind of generates these interfaces for you. So the base interface is called event target, which every node object in the DOM actually implements. And it has a method on it called add event listener, where the first parameter is a string and the second parameter is a callback, which right now is basically spec'd as a @JS function, so you can pass lambdas into it. But what you're saying is that that's actually not sufficient because it's not well typed. It's just an arbitrary thing. And so what I'm actually looking at, before I will release Elemental 2.0, I'm actually trying to make things more idiomatic. And so, for example, the initial parameter to add event listener, I'm thinking of adding an overloaded version of that method, so that the event names would be an enum. So you would say things like, add listener, event.click. So that you don't have to remember the string names of all the bazillions of events that are in the browser now. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is I could teach the elemental generators to add overloads to the elements that are relevant. Like, for example, add click listener, add double click, and so on. So that can be taken care of via auto generation. But in general, though, I think going this route actually will make your code much simpler. As Leif said earlier, things like flexible box model, essentially it's a div, right? And so it's a div with like a couple of attributes. And so to layer on like a really complex like widget UI on that is kind of overkill because you can actually get access to like 100% of the functionality with just like CSS and a couple of attributes. So you don't actually need a lot of extra code.
Yeah, right now you can also use GWT query to bind on any event in the browser. So you can easily pass any kind of DOM element as well as widget to bind on events. That is already possible with GWT query.
Is it well maintained?
I think to another extent, though, probably what you're talking about is the fact that we have higher level notions of events in the widgets, like values. Like, for example, you could have like a numeric box, like a double box, that fires chains of events that give you back numbers and things like that. And what you would get from the raw DOM API would be basically that someone changed the box, and then you'd have to actually call like element.getText or something like that. So yes, we kind of should look into some kind of utilities that sit on top of this. But I don't think we necessarily need a widget model for that. We maybe just need some kind of like event adapters or something. But anyway, maybe you had another question before Chris?
Okay.
I was just going to add to that, really, because the sample code that I wrote for the Polymer GWT talk that I gave yesterday, I posted on Twitter and Google+. You can find a link to the GitHub repo that has that sample code, and it really illustrates, kind of foreshadows the JS interop technique for attaching listeners, and it even illustrates how to cast an event to a higher level event with properties. So it kind of shows how you might be able to do this at the bare level, at bare metal, but still have access to more semantic event information.
I just wanted to build on Chris's point, which is that actually, if you got a hold of an interface in Elemental 2.0, let's say it's a HTML radio button or something, or HTML input, and you actually know that it's a numeric-only text box or something like that, you can actually make an interface, a JS-type interface that like extends HTML input element, and you can actually add higher-level routines for that. And what you would do is you would use the Java 8 default interface technique. So you could add new methods to this interface and give a default implementation where underneath they would delegate to add event listener, but then they would actually call back on a higher level interface like value changed event or something. And so it's relatively easy for you to actually extend this stuff in your own app with default interfaces in Java 8. It's one of the reasons why we want to require Java 8 for JS interop in GWT 2.8. It makes doing this much easier.
So you had a second question as well.
Yep. So about the revamping of the build system. So I just want to ask if you plan to stop including classes from an old Guava version, for instance, or there are other libs that have renamed packages that get included in the GWT user distribution that sometimes or often get included in our imports, and then they break the build and stuff like that. So maybe not completely revamping the whole build system, but just introducing a real dependency mechanism, or just including jars in the trunk, in the tools repository. Come on.
So I think the short answer, the German short answer for that is set up your IDE to ignore these. That's the short fix.
That's not an answer.
That's not.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to give the American answer to this, not the German answer. I think the real answer is actually we've actually encountered this problem, and actually we've been remapping some of those libraries already. We've already kind of taken a few and actually unincluded or unjar-jarred them.
Yes, Sam.
And so I think actually exactly what you're saying is that the GWT build should actually use real dependencies. We should not remap them and include them in the jar. But we can then produce a final GWT user jar where we run jar on the final executable or Maven Shade plugin or something like that to produce a version that has obfuscated internal dependencies if it's needed. But I think we've been bitten in the past actually by these rebased jars. They're kind of hard to maintain. They're actually a real pain. Like for example, every time they release a new version of Guava or a new version of JDT or some other library like protobufs, we actually have to spend a lot irritating effort like basically rebasing these jars. And so we should get out of business. Actually, let's ask Roberto how he feels about this. It's a pain. But do you think we should continue doing it, or do you think we should get out of that business? Yeah. So the answer is like we actually want to do that.
I think everyone loses time with these kinds of things on the GWT distribution. Everyone's builds are broken at one time because of those kinds of things.
Well, we're not saying we're going to get out of rebasing, but we can just rebase the final jar. We don't have to rebase the individual jars. That's the main problem. In the source code, the way we refer to Guava is like com Google GWT third party com Google Guava or whatever. So it's like this like rebased package scheme. Our source code would be cleaner if actually we used the original jar, and as a final step, you can run jar on the entire binary. You don't have to actually do it for the individual jars. That's actually causes problems.
So soon?
Roberto's going to fix it. Yeah. It's in process.
So actually, some of the libraries, we have also patches to them in our code. So we're trying to remove all that and move one by one out. The thing is, sometimes if we don't rebase at the end, then users, sometimes they have two versions in the class path. And we get the wrong version for our code, or they get the wrong version for their code. So the rebasing needs to happen at the end, like Ray says, automatically, if you need it, I guess.
Thank you.
So Brian.
Also, one more thing, if we modularize the GWT jar, so that the GWT dev jar and the GWT user jar are no longer monolithic, some of these dependencies go away. Like the GWT user jar has a ton of dependencies packaged with it that don't always have to do with your application. They have to do with actually running things like unit test or running generators. You know, like a lot of the generators depend on external libraries, and so those could be put into other packages where you wouldn't always pick up those extraneous things. Brian, you wanted to give your own answer?
Actually, it's a different subject. So going back to the earlier question about including JavaScript in a GWT application, I'm not sure why we didn't suggest maybe a client bundle and script injector. It seems like would that work?
Yeah, that's going to be the easy solution, actually. That's the one we should have recommended in the first place. Thank you. So, you know, you can have client bundles, and client bundles can have text resources, and you can just use a text resource, bundle this with your application, and you can say get text and use a script injector to just drop that into a script tag. It's 2 lines of code, literally. You wouldn't get any optimization on that piece of JavaScript. Yeah, but it's still better than dropping it into the page in the first place, because you can still benefit from things like code splitting.
Okay, next one.
Actually, I just wanted to say one more thing. You actually can get optimization. I prototyped this script resource a while ago, and basically what it does is it dumps the script into a linker artifact, and then there's an extra linker at the end. It runs closure compiler and weaves together the script resource and the actual thing together. So it is possible to do it. Anyway, let's not.
Okay, hello. We still got a pretty much restricted subset of Java in the Java runtime emulation, and I wanted to ask if there are still those restrictions that JavaScript can't just make that, or is there any way that more stuff gets into it?
So some things are kind of fundamental, and they could be emulated, but it would actually produce poorly performing apps anyway. So threading, concurrency don't really map at all, because JavaScript doesn't have synchronous blocking, doesn't have threads. There are other things where the Java APIs are synchronous, but JavaScript would be asynchronous. One of these, for example, is the like calendar and time stuff. So, for example, there's a time zone class where if you want to construct or deal with like regional time zones, you can feed in not just the default locale time zone, but any arbitrary locale. And the way that works in the JRE is that it accesses a file called tzdb.dat, which is a giant time zone database that lives locally, so it uses the class loader to load it. To make that work in the GWT compiler, we'd have to bundle like probably 200 kilobytes of time zone data statically encoded into every application, including the smallest application, so it's not feasible. And so we'd have to produce a slight variance on these APIs where you'd have to, ahead of time, somehow declare 1 or 2 or 3 time zone locales that you expect to use, and then make a call in the beginning of your app to asynchronously load them, let's say from a JSON file on your server. And so there are some APIs that are problematic because in Java they're synchronous, but in JavaScript they're fundamentally asynchronous.
Yeah, let's get this one.
Yeah.
No.
But there are other things that we could add that we just haven't implemented over time. And so I would suggest that if there are some APIs, do it on an as-needed basis. So if there's some Java 8 APIs or Java 7 APIs that you think should be there, send a message to the mailing list, write a patch, and then contribute to classes. There's somebody at the show I was talking to who's implementing the entire Java 8 Java.time API. And I gave him some advice on how to do it efficiently, and if he produces an efficient implementation, it might actually make it into Java 8. There's other APIs like the Java 8 functional stuff and stream stuff that we won't have in the beginning, but if you guys submit them, we'll definitely put them in there, or they'll be deferred to us working on them later. But we want to have more of the JRE emulation, I think, especially for Java 8.
So we should have a bit more kind of controversial questions. What do you think? I mean, we started with GWT number 3, version 3, and there have been kind of, I guess the whole point for GWT 3 is that we can break stuff over there to make it better, right? So there have been a lot of discussion what could we be dropping from GWT 3. How about if we go around the panel and everybody picks their favorite thing that we should drop from GWT 3. And please don't give kind of big speech why, but just say what's the thing, and then we can actually have a quick vote who kind of joins, who kind of thinks that it's a good idea that we should drop that thing from GWT number 3.
I'll start. So we're going to drop permutations and we're going to drop generators, because that will affect a whole bunch in the compiler, make the compiler much better.
So who thinks it's a good idea to drop permutation generators?
I can tell you why it's a good idea, and you can see you can see the compiler engineers on the front row saying, "Yay!"
Yeah, only the guys who are writing and maintaining those.
I'm not saying we won't give you the ability to generate code. I'm just saying we have to do it differently. We won't give you the ability to optimize for a certain permutation, but it's not the job of the compiler to do that, rather than something else which we're going to build up.
So let's have another vote. Do you believe Daniel? Oh, that's improvement. Next one.
Yeah, so I'm going to take the reverse, and actually I want to ask the audience, how many people are a little bit uncomfortable with the talk about dropping widgets in GWT 3?
Not too many, actually.
Okay. Not as many as I expected, actually. Let's try that again.
Or how, I think the real question you're asking is how many are still going to be using Sencha widgets, right? Yeah, I'm just kidding. Yes. Go ahead.
That's actually not the question. The thing is, the widget as an idea of encapsulating HTML elements together with the code that runs them is exactly what I hear in like the Polymer and Web Components presentations. The idea is the same. So the idea has value, and we don't want to lose that idea. If we have to change the implementation details, great, but I think we just need to be careful how we say that.
Yeah, I actually agree with you 100%. It's the architecture of the current widget system that we want to get away with, but that doesn't mean we're going to get away from the idea of having a well-defined protocol, spec, and interface for encapsulating behavior. Like, I happen to love the way the appearance pattern works. I think it's a pretty cool thing. And maybe there's a way to actually make that work with like web components or some other thing. And so that's up in the air right now. But like, yeah, it's something we could eventually, I could see being replaced with a new definition of widgets. Anyway, it's my turn, right?
So, what do you want to drop?
Oh God, what can I drop?
Be careful, we have +2 per right, so.
Everything? No, just kidding.
Wow.
He took my answer. I was going to say generators as well, and linkers, okay, linkers. So I'll tell you why. I just don't want to say why, that we want to drop linkers. I'll tell you why, because I've written a lot of linkers. Linkers are in effect encoding a build system, a rule into GWT. And the GWT compiler should not really be in the business of acting like Maven or Gradle. It's essentially a plugin for performing like post-build steps. And so we really think that things like generators should be done with annotation processors or build rules in the build system. Likewise, assembling artifacts and assets after the compile is completed has traditionally been, in every other language, been part of the build system. It just happens to be this magical thing in GWT, and we should get rid of that as well. It actually increases super dev mode refresh times as well, so there's other reasons to want to do that.
So who thinks it's a good idea to drop linkers from GWT 3? Oh, quite a few, actually.
I think you should clarify. Yeah, you should probably say something about that, because John actually feels strongly about these things.
It's important to note that when we say we want to drop something from GWT 3, that's not saying that that behavior won't be supported. It's saying that that behavior won't be part of the compile step. So when we ship GWT 3, we're going to have tight integration with some very fast build system, and the sample apps are going to show you how to perform these stages as build system definitions. So you're still going to have all this functionality, it's just not going to be part of the compiler, and it shouldn't be part of the compiler.
So if you think about this, when GWT started, we were Java 1.4-ish, somewhere around that. So there was no way of generating code inside of the build, because the first time we've actually seen it was Java 1.5. So in that sense, GWT needed to be able to actually generate code and do this somehow. And that was easy to just build that into the compiler. If you go down the road and you actually need incremental compilation, it's a very, 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 very bad idea. And we've been feeling that pain for the last 1.5 years. And we know if we move this into the steps that are today there in the Java ecosystem, it's going to get much, much better. And that's kind of what's driving us there.
So, Kristen, what do you want to drop?
Well, first I would say that I would extract some of the tools that they are in the toolkit, like activities and places, request factory. Those products, the editor framework as well, those products are really nice into the as add-ons to GWT, but I don't think it should be part of the
So
SDK.
pick one.
Okay, pick one. First would be request factory out of those three.
Oh, quite a few.
Sorry, Thomas.
Next, Kristen.
So last year in San Francisco, I got booed for this. So I expect the same, but in order to be consistent with that, I'm thinking that, I'll be a little more careful now, less German. I'm thinking HTML is a way better way to define layout for the web than XML. And I feel not very close to UI binder. I'm not suggesting to delete it, but it's a... I'm starting to shake. I see him picking the tomatoes already come flying at me. So I'm thinking it could live outside of GWT as a separate framework. Yeah, but that's too reasonable. I still want to, Yeah, so I think if it's a separate library that I could just download from a repository and use, that's fine. I don't think this needs to be in GWT. I think HTML templating, like Singular does, like Array does, is better for me, and I don't need to have that in GWT.
Come on. Anyone agrees? Yeah, quite a few.
Okay. See, if you do nice. Stay reasonable. Yeah.
Also, if you wait a year, they usually know a year.
Yeah.
The ideas need to grow on people.
Plant the seeds now.
So this is entirely the product of a small project that was undertaken today, sort of at the suggestion over a year ago of Dan trying to say, okay, let's go ahead and kill off permutations, and wow, that internationalization stuff is kind of nasty to deal with permutations. So we decided to do it. We're not anywhere near there yet, but the little bit of work we've gotten there reminds me how badly we need to delete everything that's deprecated and a lot of things that are linked to deprecated code. The date, time, formatting stuff is just a rat's nest of this interface is implemented by this class, which is GWT.created, but then it calls this interface over here. And there's a bunch of interfaces that don't even seem to be used, and that interface will sometimes have no methods, but it will extend another interface, and that one's reference is the one you should use somewhere else, and you don't actually ever use it. And it's difficult to actually get into these because they're only called from protected constructors, which you can't, yeah. So all the deprecated code gone, and then clean up anything that came anywhere near it.
So Leif.
Yeah, all the good ones have already been taken. So I'm going to suggest a bad one. No, that's too popular. The thing I was thinking of that we'll get this really cool JS interrupt, so we could get rid of this really ugly Gisny syntax.
So who can live without Gisny?
How are you going to call private methods and protected methods
Mostly.
from people who make bad APIs? All right, so no more bad APIs ever. We just agreed.
Just as in normal Java, with a security manager.
So,
Internally, we have a name for that. We call it the violator pattern.
so we have a couple of minutes left. Let's do another roundup where you could ask from the audience basically what you would want them to do for a GUID right now. I mean, please give them something really short and practical, something that everybody could start working on right now.
You want the same ones we did over there? Those are pretty good ones.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let the good ones to the other. The only thing that I want to ask you guys is to talk about GWT as much as possible, make some noise. Well, the difference between the JavaScript portal and ours is just that we don't talk enough about it outside of our work.
Yeah, let's do a Hacker News flash mob. Or Reddit flash.
Hey, actually, one question from the audience. Who has given a presentation about GWT? Somewhere, anywhere? Wow. Whoa. Really many.
Is there anything we could do to help you with that?
Make the site sexier.
Well, make the site sexier.
You have a great logo now.
Sorry, what? So make the site sexier would mean not do some significant work on the SDK. So if you needed to choose between the two, what would you rather have me or John or Roberto doing?
But you can always have a pull request with sexy content inside.
So I'm going to go back to one of the first questions, which was someone got up and asked or said the fact that people's perception is that GWT is dead. And I don't think the reason that the perception is like that has anything to do actually with the SDK itself anymore. I mean, we've shipped a lot of updates in the last couple of years. There's been a major change to, for example, the way incremental compile works. There's been a lot of improvements there, and you can't say that GWT hasn't been updated sufficiently. But what's really changed is the fact that the website hasn't been updated. So people generally don't go look at the commit logs to actually figure out if the project is dead or alive. They tend to go look at the blogosphere or they go look at the website. If I go to the AngularJS website or the Polymer website or the React.js website, I get a good idea that that site is alive and well because there's tutorials, there's a news page, they're constantly adding things. And so what I would ask you guys to do is help us delete all of the old demos and articles and tutorials from 2006 and whatever, or 2007, and whatever new apps that you guys have written or any new samples that you have written, please submit them to the site. So if you guys have got a cool looking demo, submit it to the site. If it's proprietary, maybe try to factor out the thing that's proprietary to your particular app and just make one with mock data and submit it to the site. And maybe we can have a gallery of cool sample apps and a gallery of like articles or tutorials that basically tell people how they did it. And if even just one of you every month did that, and we have 400 people in this room, the perception of the website would change overnight. And so that's basically what I would ask from the people in the conference.
Along those lines, it would be really nice to have a GWT showcase on the site where you could see screenshots, maybe even live applications. I know a lot of GWT applications are behind firewalls, but if you have a public GWT application, and the more public the better, and the more nice looking the better, yeah, it'd be great if we could have a showcase.
You don't want to ask anything.
Yeah, so many people mentioned that they're having hard times promoting GWT in their companies. I'm one of those, actually. Certainly, I'd say, keep fighting. let the Angular crowd, etc., not win. You know, they might have compelling arguments in the first couple of weeks, but a year down the road, we are better, way better, in way better shape. So I really, just keep on pushing GWT forward in your companies.
Yeah, sort of along the same lines. Of things that sort of haven't been mentioned already, or things that we haven't said in the other half of this conference. Doing what GWT does best, making sure people do what GWT does best, which is maintainable code, things we can continue to work with. But at the same time, it's really easy just to write a quick class and say, oh, we'll just kind of slap it into this other one here. Oh, we'll just kind of smear a little bit more here. So I'm not just going to go just as far as saying writing maintainable code, but actually write tests for your code. Make sure you actually test this stuff. I mean, doing things like that just make it crystal clear what it is we're getting out of GWT a year later when you look back in time and say, wow, Actually, I didn't write terrible code a year ago for once. Maybe I'm totally unlike the rest of you, but usually I find that past me is an idiot, so I try to assume that future me is an idiot too, and that works a lot less well than you'd think, except for the test writing thing.
Are you volunteering to do JUnit 4 support?
I will volunteer to do JUnit 4 support. I've been trying to do it for a little while, and I've been looking for a kick in the head to get it going, so I would welcome any help. But that's something I'll step up and start working on as soon as this permutation thing is killed.
All right, what should you do? Keep on rocking. And to clarify a bit, we talked about this a bit already, like activities and places, and then someone showed that, hey, there's another, probably most people's opinions, better way of doing it. That's what you do. You find out good things to do and build that on top of the core compiler, the really low-level stuff that the GWT team mainly focuses on. So all the high-level stuff on top of that. That's your job.
I have one request as well. So who knows somebody who was really skeptical about GWT because of the compiler being slow or the development cycle being a bit complicated? So one question from you. Go to that guy tomorrow, preferably, and show them new super dev mode and show that it actually is completely going to change within a year. And actually, it's not just the super dev mode, but the incremental compilation as well. And I think that's kind of one of the most significant things that we have been doing, or the GWT team have been doing for the past year. So I would like to give an applause for the guys who have been actually building super dev mode and the incremental compilation during the past year.
So actually, specifically, let me point out, most of the work of this was actually done by John and Roberto, who are sitting here, and of course Brian, who actually did super dev mode. And you can imagine having a compiler that is 8 years old. This is actually a tough job because this compiler always had the assumption in there that we need to optimize for size, and it actually optimized all over the place. So they literally had to clean up all of the compiler, remove all the optimizations, because you can't do incremental compilation if some of the methods are gone, which you might need later. So you literally had to go through all of the compiler, clean it up completely, and redo a whole bunch of chunks. And they did this without breaking. We were still able to run Google on top of that compiler, and that's actually an astonishing achievement. I think it's really, really great.
So,
Can I just say one more thing about promoting GWT? Yeah, as a longtime GWT promoter, if you've written a cool GWT project, open source project, sample, showcase, whatever, please let me know about it so I can help promote it on my feeds and share it with the GWT community. Otherwise, it may be hard for just unknown or lesser known individuals to promote, right? We'd like to raise those up a level, and I'll send it to Ray, and then the 15,000 people that follow him will know about it.
Thanks. Now I'm taking the mic away because the panel is we are so much over time already. So thanks everyone for coming to the conference. It has been awesome. Who thinks they would come again next year? Most of the guys. That's great. Thank you very much, and come again next year.